fear of the world that they chose to live in as immigrants and to protect me from all of those things. I think I did actually turn to horror as a way to, in a really unconscious way, process some of that, like process the idea of being in a place that's unfamiliar and you're kind of vulnerable and you don't know where to go and you're isolated and then there's a danger, you know, all around. So that was how I identified with those movies, even though, you know, literally there was no one on the screen that looked like me, and you know.
You probably didn't even know you were doing that at the time. You couldn't.
Yes.
You couldn't get. You know, you just were doing it unconsciously.
I was.
That's something Wes Craven talked about a lot. I remember when he would talk about how, I think in the '80s when people were criticizing the violence of his movies, people would say, isn't this horrific? You know, what you're kind of putting in people's heads. And he would say, every time I go see one of my movies with a crowd, when it ends, they're flushed, they're laughing, and it's like something's been exercised. And I think there is something to that idea that, you know, we have very primal fears, and you know, horror just sort of reflects the things that we're afraid of, but there's something about a horror movie that allows us to sort of, at the same time we're confronting something head on, we're also sort of lifting some of that weight off of our daily lives.
What are yours? What's in Unfriended? What do you think are your personal, what is the personal things that you have in you that are in your work?
Well, Unfriended specifically came from my experience researching a project I wrote a couple of years ago where I spent some time with some people in the intelligence services and found out some really alarming things about how they could access phones and all the stuff that was happening. And just when that seemed scary enough, one of them said something along the lines of, you know, but we're the government, so, you know, there are people who can do it better than we can, and the people that you really need to be alarmed of aren't us, but the you know, the 20-year-old kid in the basement who can do it better than we can, and is just really bored. And that scared the crap out of me.
That's cool, and that's a lot of what's in the movie. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Does anybody?
Do you think a horror movie can exist without comedy involved? Are there any films that don't have comedy, or does it always need a comical element?
I mean, yeah. Well, it depends. It's.
Can you repeat
obviously
the question?
there are horror comedies, overt horror comedies like American Werewolf in London. But I think, I don't know if you can point to The Exorcist as being filled with side-splitting humor. Although, you know what's interesting about The Exorcist? The way tastes change and attention spans, they change over time, because, you know, The Exorcist came out in the 70s, and I don't think people had seen anything like that, and they would run out of the theatre in terror. And then when do you remember when they re-released The Exorcist? Was it the early 2000s?
Yeah,
Ryan, Tarek, you know.
2000.
In 2000, right? So they re-released The Exorcist in theatres with extra footage, like the spider walk scene. I was living in Australia at the time, and I went to see it at like a suburban multiplex, just the same multiplex suburban theatre that you would have a million of here in the US. I didn't see it at some cool inner city theatre. I just went out, and all these kids, these suburban kids, teenagers, they were there because they had heard that this movie was the scariest, and they were all cracking up laughing. And they thought it was hilarious when she's like, lick me, and it was kind of an amazing little lab rat experiment of like, wow, these kids just don't have this. And I've had the same experience showing The Shining to younger people, like a teenager